The desert sun beat mercilessly against Eleanor's back as she stumbled through the canyon, her torn dress catching on mesquite branches. 3 days without water, 2 without food. The gold wedding band her grandmother had given her, the last thing of value she possessed, felt heavy in her trembling palm. Behind her, somewhere in the maze of red rock, her husband's killer still searched. She'd witnessed the murder, and now Frank Cutler's men wanted her silence permanent. Her vision blurred. The rocks seemed to shift and breathe. She collapsed against a boulder, pressing her grandmother's ring to her lips. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the desert wind. "I tried." Before diving deeper into Eleanor's journey, I hope you're enjoying this tale. If you are, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support truly matters and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. I'd love to know, where are you listening from today? The shadow fell across her first. Tall, broad-shouldered, utterly still. Eleanor's heart seized. She looked up into the face of an Apache warrior, his long black hair tied back with leather cord, obsidian eyes studying her with an intensity that should have frightened her. Scars mapped his muscular bronze chest, each one a story of survival. He wore buckskin leggings and moccasins that had made no sound approaching. "Please," she croaked, holding up the ring with shaking fingers. "Take it. Just let me die in peace." The warrior crouched before her, movements fluid as water. He didn't reach for the ring. Instead, he pulled a water skin from his side and held it to her cracked lips. "Gold is worthless in the desert," he said in perfect English, his voice like gravel and honey. "You are not." Eleanor drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. When she'd had her fill, he studied her torn dress, the bruises purpling her arms, the wild fear in her blue eyes. "Who hunts you?" "Frank Cutler's men. They killed my husband for his claim. I saw—" Her voice broke. "They'll kill me too." The warrior's jaw tightened. "Cutler." He said the name like a curse. "He takes what isn't his." He stood, offering his hand, calloused, strong, scarred across the knuckles. "I am Nashota. My ranch is half a day's ride. You will be safe there." "Your ranch?" "My father was Apache. My mother was a settler. I walk between both worlds." He gestured to the horse hidden in the shadows, a magnificent paint stallion. "Can you ride?" Eleanor tried to stand, and her legs buckled. Without hesitation, Nashota caught her, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. His skin was fever-warm against hers, and she felt the steady drum of his heartbeat through his chest. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like prey. "Why help me?" she whispered against his shoulder. "Because no one helped my mother when she needed it most." His arms tightened fractionally. "That ends with me." They rode through the changing colors of dusk, purple shadows lengthening across terracotta stone, the air cooling and filling with the scent of sage and juniper. Nashota's ranch emerged from the high desert like something out of a dream. A sturdy adobe house with a covered porch, corrals holding a dozen horses, a vegetable garden somehow green in this harsh land. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, he set her carefully on a chair by the stone fireplace. The room was simple, but lived in. Woven Apache baskets alongside frontier furniture, a rifle above the mantel, herbs hanging to dry from the rafters. "You're hurt," he observed, noting how she favored her left side. "Bruised ribs from when I ran." Eleanor watched him move through the space with quiet efficiency, heating water, gathering clean cloth and herbs. "You live here alone?" 5 years now. He knelt before her, his hands gentle as he cleaned the cuts on her arms. After my mother died, my Apache family went north to the reservation. I couldn't follow. This land, it's all I have of both my worlds. And Cutler wants it? He wants everything between here and the territorial border. Nashota's hands paused. He's made 3 offers. Each time I refuse, someone dies. Last month, my neighbor. The month before, a ranch hand who wouldn't work for him. His dark eyes found hers. I won't let him have you too. Eleanor's breath caught at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. You don't even know me. I know you survived 3 days in the desert. I know you're still fighting. He wrapped her ribs with practiced care, his fingers barely touching her skin, yet leaving trails of heat. That's enough. Over the following days, a rhythm developed. Eleanor's body healed under Nashota's careful tending, but her spirit remained fractured. She woke screaming from nightmares of her husband's blood spreading across the dirt, of Cutler's cold smile as he gave the order to eliminate witnesses. Each time, Nashota would appear in her doorway, never entering without permission, just standing vigil until her breathing calmed. You're safe here, he'd say quietly. I promise you that. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. By the second week, Eleanor insisted on working. I won't be a burden. Nashota had looked at her steadily. You're not a burden, but if working helps you heal, then work. He handed her an apron. Can you cook? She almost smiled. Better than I can shoot. Then we'll work on both. The kitchen became her domain. Eleanor discovered Nashota had a weakness for apple pie, an impossibility in the desert, until he showed her the root cellar he dug deep into the earth, where apples from his small orchard stayed cool. She learned he took his coffee, black and strong, that he rarely spoke at breakfast but became more talkative as the day wore on. In return, he taught her to ride his gentlest mare, a dappled gray named Cloud. The first time Eleanor sat in the saddle alone, her heart hammered with terror and exhilaration. You're in control, Nashota said from beside her, one hand resting on her leg to steady her. She feels your fear. Breathe. Show her you trust her. Eleanor closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of horse and leather and the man beside her. When she opened them, Nashota was watching her with an expression that made her stomach flutter. Good, he murmured. Now ride. Evenings found them on the porch, watching stars emerge like scattered diamonds across velvet sky. This was when Nashota spoke of his mother, a teacher from Boston who'd fallen in love with an Apache scout, choosing love over society's approval. They had 10 years together before the fever took her, he said one night, carving a piece of wood with sure strokes of his knife. My father followed her within the year, said his spirit couldn't stay where hers had gone. You don't believe in that? Eleanor asked softly. I believe love can be that powerful. He glanced at her, and something flickered in his eyes. I've just never felt it myself. The words hung between them like a question neither was ready to answer. 3 weeks into her stay, Eleanor woke to find the ranch shrouded in an eerie silence. No roosters crowing, no horses nickering for their morning feed. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Nashota standing perfectly still in the yard, his eyes fixed on the horizon. What is it? She asked, joining him. Dust cloud. Riders. Too many to be friendly. He turned to her, his face grave. Eleanor, I need you to listen carefully. There's a cave, 1/2 mile north, hidden behind the waterfall. Take Cloud and... No, She grabbed his arm. I'm not running anymore. You said so yourself. This is different. If it's Cutler, then we face him together. Eleanor's voice was steel. You've taught me to shoot, to ride, to survive. Now, teach me to fight. Nashota studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Get the Winchester from above the mantel. Load it. Stay inside and cover the windows. Don't shoot unless I give the signal. What signal? You'll know it when you hear it. The riders materialized from the heat shimmer. 6 men, Cutler at their head, but this time they weren't alone. They dragged a wagon behind them, and in it, bound and bloodied, was Sheriff Garrett. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Oh God, Nashota's jaw clenched. Stay inside, no matter what happens. But Eleanor had already made her decision. She checked the Winchester, feeling its weight, remembering every lesson Nashota had taught her. Then she took her position by the window. Cutler reined in his horse 20 yards from the porch. Nashota, I brought you a present. He gestured to Garrett. Found your friend here asking too many questions in town. Thought you might want to say goodbye before I put a bullet in his head. Nashota stepped onto the porch, rifle loose in his hands. Let him go, Cutler. Your fight is with me. My fight? Cutler laughed. No, Apache. My fight is with anyone who stands between me and what I want. That includes meddling sheriffs, stubborn ranchers, and witnesses to murder. His eyes found the window where Eleanor stood. Hello, Mrs. Morrison. Enjoying your little hideaway? She's not part of this, Nashota said. She became part of it when she opened her mouth. Cutler drew his pistol, pressing it to Garrett's temple. Here's how this works. You give me the woman, I let the sheriff live. You refuse, I kill him and burn this ranch to the ground with both of you inside. Simple math. Eleanor's hands tightened on the rifle. She caught Nashota's eye through the window. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Wait. There's a third option, Nashota said calmly. Oh? Do tell. You let Garrett go. You ride away, and you live to see tomorrow. Cutler's smile was vicious. 6 guns against 1. Even an Apache can't beat those odds. 7 guns, Eleanor called out, stepping onto the porch with the Winchester leveled at Cutler's chest. And I'm a very motivated student. Nashota's eyes flashed with anger and pride in equal measure, but he didn't order her back inside. Cutler's expression soured. Touching, really, but it doesn't change the math. He cocked his pistol. Last chance, Nashota. Her or him. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Garrett, bloodied and beaten, looked straight at Nashota and mouthed 2 words. Do it. Nashota's rifle came up in one fluid motion. The shot cracked across the desert, striking the rope binding Garrett's hands. The sheriff rolled from the wagon, grabbing a fallen gun, and suddenly the odds had shifted. Chaos erupted. Eleanor fired at the nearest rider, her bullet catching him in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. Nashota's second shot took down another. Garrett, despite his injuries, fought like a cornered wolf. But Cutler was already galloping toward the house, his face twisted with rage. He fired wildly, bullets splintering the porch railing. Eleanor dove behind a post, her heart hammering, trying to draw a bead on him. Nashota threw himself between Eleanor and Cutler's gun, and the world went silent, except for the roar of blood in Eleanor's ears. She saw Nashota stagger, saw the red bloom spreading across his shoulder, saw him drop to one knee. Something inside her shattered and reformed, harder and sharper than before. Eleanor stepped into the open, the Winchester steady, despite her trembling hands. Cutler was reloading, confident in his victory, when she pulled the trigger. The bullet caught him square in the chest, lifting him from his saddle and dropping him into the dust. The remaining men, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons. Eleanor didn't remember crossing to Nashota. She was just suddenly there, her hands pressing against his wound, her voice breaking as she said his name over and over. "I'm all right," he gasped, covering her hands with his blood-slicked ones. "Eleanor, I'm all right. It went through clean." "You idiot," she sobbed. "You absolute idiot. You could have died." "But I didn't." He touched her face, leaving a crimson streak across her cheek. "Because you saved me." Garrett limped over, already binding the surrendered men. "That was some shooting, ma'am." "I learned from the best," Eleanor whispered, not taking her eyes off Nashota. The recovery was slow and painful. Nashota, stubborn as bedrock, insisted on being up and working within days. Eleanor, equally stubborn, refused to let him do more than sit on the porch and give orders. "I'm not an invalid," he grumbled one afternoon as she changed his bandages. "No, you're a man who took a bullet for me." Eleanor's hands were gentle but firm. "So you'll rest, or I'll tie you to that bed. Don't test me." Despite his protests, Nashota secretly loved her fussing. He'd spent so many years alone, taking care of himself, never asking for help. Having someone care for him, worry about him, love him, it was a gift he hadn't known he needed. Garrett had taken the surviving men back to town, along with Cutler's body. Word spread quickly. The reign of terror was over. Ranchers who'd been too afraid to speak up came forward with evidence of Cutler's crimes. The town breathed easier, but the violence had left its mark on both Eleanor and Nashota. She still woke with nightmares, though now they featured Nashota's blood instead of her husband's. And Nashota moved more carefully, protecting his healing shoulder, reminded of his own mortality. One evening, as Eleanor sat beside his bed reading, Nashota caught her hand. "What you did that day," he said quietly, "stepping into the line of fire, shooting Cutler, that took courage most men don't have." "I was terrified," Eleanor admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." He pulled her down beside him, wincing slightly at the movement. "My mother used to say that the strongest warriors aren't the ones who never fall, they're the ones who get back up. Like you, like us." He kissed her forehead. "We're both warriors now, Eleanor. Scarred, maybe, but unbroken." She curled against his uninjured side, careful not to hurt him, breathing in his scent, sage and leather and something uniquely him. "I love you," she whispered. "I've been afraid to say it, but I love you so much it terrifies me." Nashota's arm tightened around her. "I love you too. From the moment I saw you in that canyon, fighting to survive with nothing but will and courage." He tilted her face up to his. "Marry me, Eleanor. Not because you need protection or a home, but because I need you. Because my life makes sense when you're in it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Yes, of course yes." They kissed softly, carefully, mindful of his injury, but unable to deny the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "There's something you should know," Eleanor said, nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "I haven't had my monthly courses since I arrived here. I think I might be carrying your child." Nashota went very still. Then his hand moved to her stomach, spreading across it with something like wonder. "Truly? I'm not certain yet, but a child." His voice cracked with emotion. our child, a new life growing from all this death and pain. He looked at her with such fierce joy that Eleanor's heart felt too big for her chest. We'll do better than our parents did. We'll give them both worlds, Apache and settler. We'll teach them to be strong and kind and brave. We'll teach them to survive, Eleanor agreed, and to love without fear. They married on a crisp autumn morning when the air smelled of wood smoke and changing seasons. Garrett, fully recovered and wearing his badge with renewed pride, stood up for Nashota. A seamstress from town named Martha, who'd befriended Eleanor during their visits for the trial, stood up for her. The ceremony took place on the ranch, under the vast blue dome of sky. But traveling preachers spoke of love and commitment. But Eleanor barely heard the words. All she could see was Nashota in his best shirt and vest, his long hair braided with strips of leather and a few small feathers, a nod to his Apache heritage. His shoulder was still healing, but he stood tall and strong, looking at her like she was every sunrise and sunset he'd ever see. Eleanor wore a dress of soft blue cotton that Martha had helped her make, with delicate embroidery at the collar. She'd woven wildflowers into her hair, Indian paintbrush and desert marigold and purple sage. In her hands she carried a bouquet of the same flowers, tied with leather cord. When it came time for vows, Nashota spoke in a mixture of English and Apache, his voice carrying across the desert wind. Eleanor didn't understand all the words, but she felt their meaning in her bones. Promises of protection and partnership, of walking together through whatever life brought. Then it was her turn. I came to this desert to die, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Instead, I found life. I found home. I found you. She took his scarred hands in hers. I promise to stand beside you, not behind you, to be your partner in all things, to love you in the light and the darkness, in the easy times and the hard, to raise our children, to honor both their heritages, and to never, ever give up on us. You may kiss your bride, the preacher said with a smile. Nashota pulled her close, mindful of his healing shoulder, but unable to hold back. The kiss was tender and passionate, a promise and a celebration, witnessed by the small gathering of friends and the endless desert sky. When they pulled apart, the guests erupted in cheers. Martha dabbed at her eyes. Garrett grinned like a proud father. Mrs. Nashota, the Apache warrior, murmured against his wife's lips. Mr. Morrison, Eleanor teased back, making him laugh. I think we can both keep our names, he decided. Eleanor Morrison and Nashota, 2 people, 1 heart. Perfect, she whispered. The celebration lasted into the evening. Martha had brought a cake, somehow light and fluffy despite the desert heat. Neighboring ranchers brought whiskey and music. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon the desert night was alive with sound and joy. Eleanor danced with her husband, careful of his injury, her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Around them, people laughed and celebrated, but they existed in their own bubble of happiness. I wish my mother could have met you, Nashota said quietly. She would have loved you, your strength, your spirit. I wish my grandmother could have met you, Eleanor replied. She always said I'd know the right man when I found him, that he'd see me, really see me, not just what he wanted me to be. She looked up at him. You see me, Nashota. All of me, the scared parts and the strong parts, and you love me anyway. Not anyway, he corrected. Because of all of it. Every scar, every fear, every moment of courage. You're not perfect, Eleanor. You're real, and that's infinitely better. Later, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, they stood on the porch under a cascade of stars. Eleanor leaned back against Nashoda's chest, his arms wrapped around her waist, his hands resting protectively over where their child grew. "Happy?" he murmured into her hair. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she admitted. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all be a mirage, that I'm still dying in that canyon." "You're not." His arms tightened. "This is real. I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert, coyotes in the distance, the rustle of wind through sage, the soft nickering of horses in the corral. "Tell me an Apache story," Eleanor requested, "about the stars." Nashoda was quiet for a moment, then began to speak in a low, melodic voice. "My father used to say that the stars are campfires of the ancestors watching over us. Each light is someone who lived before, someone who loved and fought and survived. When we look up, they see us, and they remember what it was like to be human. Do you think they're watching us now? I know they are." He turned her in his arms, tilting her face up to his. "My mother and father, your grandmother, your husband who died, they're all up there, happy that we found each other, that we're building something good from all the pain." Eleanor kissed him softly. "Take me to bed, husband." "It's throbbing," she murmured hours later, pressed against him in the darkness of their bedroom, feeling the unmistakable evidence of his desire, firm against her hip. Nashoda smiled in the darkness, his hand trailing down her spine with reverent slowness. "It's not my heart," he admitted, in a voice gone rough with need, "but it awakens whenever you arrive." Eleanor laughed breathlessly, her fingers tracing patterns across his chest, carefully avoiding his healing shoulder. "You're impossible. And you're mine." He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, until they were both trembling. "Say it." "Yours," she gasped. "Always yours." They came together with exquisite care, mindful of his injury, but unable to deny the pull between them. Eleanor had never felt so cherished, so completely seen and accepted. And Nashoda, who had spent years believing himself unworthy of love, finally understood what his father had meant about spirits intertwining. This was home. This was forever. Winter arrived with unexpected ferocity. The desert, usually dry and unforgiving, was buried under 6 inches of snow. Eleanor stood at the window, marveling at how the white powder transformed the landscape into something alien and beautiful. "It won't last," Nashoda said from behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. 2, maybe 3 days, then the sun will melt it away. "It's beautiful while it's here, though." She leaned back against him, his hands coming to rest on her now visible belly. 4 months along, and their child was making itself known with kicks and flutters that filled Eleanor with wonder. "We should check on the horses," Nashoda said, though he made no move to leave their warm house. "We should," Eleanor agreed, also not moving. They stood together, watching snow fall in lazy spirals, the world hushed and peaceful. It was a rare moment of stillness in their busy lives. The past months had been filled with work. They'd expanded the ranch, taking over the properties of ranchers who'd left after Cutler's reign of terror. Eleanor had proven to have a gift for managing the books, her neat handwriting filling ledgers with figures that showed steady profit. Nashoda worked with the horses, breeding and training them for sale. Together, they were building something that would last, but it wasn't always easy. There were still those in town who looked sideways at the Apache warrior and his white wife, who whispered behind their hands about half-breed babies and broken conventions. Eleanor faced them with a cold fury that made even the boldest gossips think twice. "Let them talk," Nashoda had said when she'd come home in tears after a particularly ugly encounter at the general store. "Their small minds don't determine our worth." "I just want our child to grow up free of that hatred," Eleanor had replied. "They will, because we'll teach them to be proud of who they are, to own both their heritages without shame." He'd cupped her face, his thumb brushing away at her tears. "Our child will be strong, Eleanor, like their mother." Now, watching the snow fall, Eleanor thought about that strength, about how far she'd come from the terrified woman in the canyon, about how love had transformed them both. "I'm going to check on the horses," Nashoda finally said, kissing her temple. "Stay warm. Be careful," she called as he bundled into his heaviest coat and headed for the door. "It's slippery out there." He paused, looking back at her with such tenderness it took her breath away. "I love you, Eleanor Morrison Nashoda." She smiled. They'd compromised on names, hyphenating them both. "I love you too, husband." Nashoda was gone less than 10 minutes when Eleanor heard the crash. She ran to the window, her heart in her throat, and saw him lying motionless in the snow near the barn. "Nashoda!" She didn't think, just grabbed her coat and ran, slipping and sliding across the icy ground. "Nashoda, please, please be okay." He was conscious when she reached him, but his face was gray with pain. "My leg," he gasped. "I think it's broken." Eleanor's nursing instincts kicked in. She examined the leg carefully. Definitely broken, but the bone hadn't pierced the skin. "Can you stand if I help you?" "I can try." It was agonizing work, getting him back to the house. Nashoda bit back groans of pain, his arm heavy across Eleanor's shoulders, hopping on his good leg. By the time they reached the porch, both were sweating despite the cold. Inside, Eleanor helped him onto their bed, then grabbed every medical supply they had. She'd learned much over the past months, but setting a broken bone was beyond her skill. "We need a doctor," she said, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Town is 5 miles away, in this snow, with night falling." Nashoda shook his head. "You can't go alone." "I'm not leaving you like this." Eleanor looked at his leg, already swelling inside his boot. She had to cut the boot off, had to stabilize the leg somehow. "I can do this. You taught me to be strong. Now let me prove it." What followed were the longest hours of Eleanor's life. Using everything Nashoda had taught her about Apache healing, combined with the frontier medicine she'd learned from Martha, she carefully cut away his boot, examined the break, and set the bone as gently as she could. Nashoda gripped the bedframe so hard the wood groaned, sweat pouring down his face, but he didn't cry out. "You're doing fine," he gasped as she bound the leg with splints made from kindling wood. "Steady hands, just like shooting." "If you die on me, I'll kill you," Eleanor said through her tears. Despite the pain, Nashoda laughed. "That's my warrior." She gave him willow bark tea for the pain, then sat beside him through the night, monitoring his fever, changing cool cloths on his forehead, praying to any god who would listen that she'd done enough. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered desert in shades of gold and pink, Nashoda's fever broke. His eyes cleared, finding hers. "You saved me," he whispered. "You saved me first," Eleanor replied, gripping his hand. "It's only fair." "We save each other," Nashoda corrected. "That's what partners do." The doctor, when he finally arrived 3 days later after the snow melted, examined Nashoda's leg with a critical eye. Then he sat back, looking at Eleanor with new respect. "Ma'am, you set this bone as well as I could have done. Maybe better. Where'd you learn to do that?" "From necessity," Eleanor said simply, "and from the best teacher in the territory." Nashota squeezed her hand, pride shining in his eyes. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers. The desert, briefly fed by winter snow, burst into bloom. Purple lupine and orange poppies, white datura, and red Indian paintbrush. Eleanor walked through this riot of color, her hand on her heavily pregnant belly, marveling at the beauty. Nashota's leg had healed well, though he still walked with a slight limp. He worked alongside her in the garden, planting vegetables for the coming season, preparing for the arrival of their child. They'd converted the spare room into a nursery. Eleanor had sewn curtains and a tiny quilt. Nashota had carved a cradle from mesquite wood, every detail perfect, working on it during the long winter as his leg healed. The cradle rocked on curved runners, and he'd burned Apache symbols of protection into the headboard alongside Christian crosses. Both worlds, he'd said when he showed it to Eleanor. So our child knows they belong to both. Now, a week passed when the doctor had said the baby would come. Eleanor felt the first twinges of labor. She was in the garden, pulling weeds, when the pain seized her middle like a giant fist. "Nashota," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think it's time." He was beside her in seconds, his face a mixture of terror and joy. "Are you sure?" Another contraction answered his question. Eleanor doubled over, breathing through it. "Very sure." Martha had agreed to assist with the birth, and she arrived within an hour of Nashota's summons, bringing clean linens and a calm competence that immediately soothed Eleanor's nerves. "First babies take their time," Martha said, examining Eleanor. "Could be hours yet. Best you rest between contractions and save your strength." But their child, it seemed, was as stubborn as both parents. The labor intensified rapidly, each contraction harder than the last. Eleanor paced the house, pausing to breathe through the pain, Nashota at her side every moment. "You can do this," he murmured during a particularly brutal contraction. "You're the strongest person I know." "Easy for you to say," Eleanor gasped, but she was smiling despite the pain. As night fell, the contractions became overwhelming. Eleanor retreated to their bedroom, Nashota supporting her, Martha directing them with practiced ease. "Almost there," Martha encouraged. "Just a little longer." "I can't," Eleanor sobbed, exhausted beyond measure. "You can." Nashota gripped her hand, his face close to hers. "Look at me, Eleanor. Look at me. You survived the desert. You survived Cutler. You saved my life twice. You can do this. Our child needs you to do this." Eleanor found strength she didn't know she had. With Nashota's voice in her ear and Martha's hands guiding her, she pushed through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the fear. And then, a cry, thin and reedy and perfect. "It's a girl," Martha announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Nashota's face crumpled with joy as Martha placed the tiny bundle in Eleanor's arms. She was perfect. Bronze skin like her father, a shock of black hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were Eleanor's own clear blue. "She's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect." Nashota knelt beside the bed, one finger gently stroking their daughter's tiny hand. She gripped it with surprising strength, and he laughed through his own tears. "What will you name her?" Martha asked softly. Eleanor and Nashota looked at each other. They discussed names endlessly over the winter, never quite settling on one. "Allie," Eleanor said suddenly, "for my grandmother, Alice, and Kimimela, Apache for butterfly." Allie Kimimela Morrison Nashota. "A butterfly," Nashota repeated softly. "Something beautiful that emerges from darkness and flies toward the sun." He kissed Eleanor's forehead, then his daughter's. Perfect. The first year of Ali's life was filled with firsts. First smile, first tooth, first word, which sounded suspiciously like horse to Nishada's delight. She grew strong and curious, equally happy, being carried in Eleanor's arms or strapped to Nishada's back in the traditional Apache cradleboard he'd made. The ranch prospered. Words spread about Nishada's skill with horses, and buyers came from as far as Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Eleanor's gardens produced more than they needed, and she began selling vegetables and herbs in town. They hired 2 ranch hands, young men who'd come west looking for honest work, and found it with the Morrison Nishadas. But it wasn't all easy. One scorching summer day, when Ali was 14 months old, Eleanor noticed something wrong. The baby was fussy, burning with fever, refusing to eat. By evening, she was listless and barely responsive. "We need the doctor," Eleanor said, terror making her voice sharp. "He's 3 towns away, treating an outbreak of influenza," Nishoda replied, though his own face was gray with fear. It would take 2 days to reach him. "Then what do we do?" Eleanor held Ali close, feeling the heat radiating from her tiny body. Nishoda was quiet for a moment, then stood. "There's a healer, an Apache woman who lives in the foothills. She delivered me, taught my mother about desert medicine. If anyone can help." He didn't finish the sentence. They rode through the night, Ali bundled against Eleanor's chest, Nishoda pushing his horse harder than he ever had before. The journey that should have taken 4 hours took 3. By the time they reached the small adobe house hidden among the rocks, dawn was breaking. The woman who answered their knock was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She took one look at Ali and ushered them inside. "Ayashe," she said to Nishota in Apache. "It's been many years." "Grandmother Spider," he replied, using the respectful term for elder women. "My daughter is sick. Please." The old woman took Ali from Eleanor's arms, examining her with gentle, knowing hands. She murmured in Apache, mixing herbs with practiced efficiency, creating a paste that she rubbed on Ali's chest and a tea she coaxed down the baby's throat. "It's a sickness of the lungs," she said in English, glancing at Eleanor. "Common in little ones. Usually it passes, but sometimes—" She didn't finish. "What can we do?" Eleanor asked, her voice breaking. "Wait, pray, keep her cool. Give her this tea every few hours." The old woman handed Eleanor a pouch of herbs. "And love her. Sometimes that's the strongest medicine." They stayed at Grandmother Spider's house for 3 days, watching over Ali as she fought the fever. Eleanor barely slept, constantly checking their daughter's breathing, sponging her with cool water, murmuring prayers and promises. Nishoda sat vigil beside them, his hand on Eleanor's shoulder, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. On the 3rd night, Ali's fever broke. She opened her eyes, saw her parents, and smiled. It was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever seen. "Thank you," she sobbed to Grandmother Spider. "Thank you." The old woman patted her hand. "The medicine helped, but it was your love that saved her. Never forget that." As they prepared to leave, Grandmother Spider pulled Nishoda aside. Eleanor saw them talking in low voices, the old woman's hand on his cheek. When he returned, his eyes were wet. "What did she say?" Eleanor asked as they rode home, Ali sleeping peacefully against her chest. "That my mother would be proud. That I've honored her memory by building a bridge between 2 worlds." He reached over, taking Eleanor's hand. that our love is the kind that changes things, that makes the future better than the past. Do you believe that? I do, Nashoda said softly. Because of you. Because of Ali. Because somehow, out of all the pain and death and loss, we found something worth living for. Eleanor leaned toward him, careful not to disturb their sleeping daughter. I love you, Nashoda, more than words can say. And I love you, Eleanor Morrison Nashoda, forever. Years passed like pages turning in a book. Ali grew into a whirlwind of a child, fearless, curious, equally comfortable speaking English and Apache, riding horses before she could properly walk, fascinated by everything from her mother's herb garden to her father's tracking skills. 2 more children followed. A son they named Thomas, after Eleanor's father, with his mother's blonde hair and his father's dark eyes, and another daughter, little Sarah, who had her father's bronze skin and her mother's stubborn chin. The ranch expanded until it was one of the most successful in the territory. Eleanor and Nashoda became known not just as ranchers, but as mediators, people who could speak to both Apache and settlers, who understood both worlds, who worked tirelessly for peace. One evening, when Ali was 10 and already showing signs of becoming as formidable as her mother, the family sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Tell us the story, Ali demanded, snuggling against her father. About how you met Mama. Nashoda glanced at Eleanor, who smiled and nodded. This story had become family legend, told and retold, each time polished to a shine. Your mother was the bravest person I'd ever seen, Nashoda began. Lost in the desert, dying of thirst, and she still had the strength to offer me her grandmother's ring for help. But you said gold was worthless, Thomas piped up. He'd heard this story 100 times, but never tired of it. I did, because your mother was worth more than all the gold in the world. That's so romantic, Ali sighed. It was terrifying, Eleanor corrected with a laugh. I thought he was going to kill me, and then he took her home, and she couldn't cook at all, Nashoda continued, making the children giggle. I could cook, I just needed practice. Remember when she burned the beans so badly we had to bury the pot? Nashoda grinned. You promised never to speak of that again, Eleanor said, but she was smiling. Little Sarah, only 4, climbed into Eleanor's lap. And then you fell in love? And then we fell in love, Eleanor confirmed, kissing her daughter's dark hair. It took us a while to admit it. Why? Ali asked. Eleanor and Nashoda looked at each other, communicating in the wordless way of long-married couples. Because love is scary, Nashoda said finally. It means trusting someone completely. It means being vulnerable. After everything your mother had been through and everything I'd lost, we were both afraid to love again. But you did it anyway, Thomas said. We did it anyway, Eleanor agreed, because some things are worth the risk. And your father, she reached over, taking Nashoda's hand, was worth every moment of fear. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, the children eventually drifted off to bed. Eleanor and Nashoda remained on the porch, their fingers intertwined, listening to the night sounds of the desert they both loved. Do you ever think about that day? Eleanor asked softly. When you found me in the canyon? Every day, Nashoda admitted. I think about how easily I could have ridden a different path, how I almost didn't investigate the tracks I saw, how close we came to never meeting. Fate, Eleanor said, or the ancestors watching over us. He pulled her close, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. Either way, I'm grateful. So am I. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his skin, the solid reality of him. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that we survived everything and found this. We didn't just survive, Eleanor. We lived. We built something real and good and lasting. Nishada kissed the top of her head. Our children will tell their children about us, about how love conquered hate, how two people from different worlds created something new and beautiful. A bridge between worlds, Eleanor murmured, remembering Grandmother Spider's words. Yes, a bridge our children walk freely, claiming both heritages without shame. He turned her face up to his eyes reflecting starlight. That's our legacy, Eleanor. Not just the ranch or the land, but the love we chose, the family we built, the peace we worked for. They kissed under the vast desert sky, in front of the home they built together, with their children sleeping safe inside. It was a moment of perfect contentment, hard-won and deeply treasured. Around them, the desert breathed its eternal rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The horses nickered softly in their corrals. Inside the house, little Sarah murmured in her sleep. And on the porch, Eleanor and Nishota held each other, two souls who'd found home in each other's arms, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy. They'd started with nothing but pain and fear. They'd built a life filled with love and hope, and they would continue building it, together, until the stars themselves burned out. Together, always together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and Nishota's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.